Andrew Burns joins me this week to discuss technical programs in brewing. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 297. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 297, and it's late January 2024. Andrew Burns joins me this week to discuss technical programs in brewing. Thank you to this week's sponsors, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They invite you to join their upcoming brewery workshop, March 24th to 27th in Austin, Texas. This one-of-a-kind event brings together professional brewers to help you start and grow your own craft brewery. To learn more, please visit breweryworkshop.com. Again, that is breweryworkshop.com. And also the Barrel Mill created the Infusion Spiral, used to add flavor and aroma to wine, spirits, and beer. The unique spiral cut design creates unrivaled surface area in a small package, allowing fast extraction of the toasted oak's aroma and flavor compounds. Looking for woods other than oak? Try our exotic woods, involving spirals made from Amarana, American or French oak, aspen, Spanish cedar, cypress, and sugar maple. For more information, go to infusionspiral.com. Again, that's infusionspiral.com. And also BeerSmith Web, the online version of BeerSmith brewing software. BeerSmith from the web lets you design great beer recipes from any browser, including your tablet or phone. Edit recipes on the go with access to the same full suite of recipe building tools as our desktop version. Try BeerSmith Web today by creating a free account at beersmithrecipes.com. And finally, a reminder to click those like and subscribe buttons on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or whatever platform you're on. Clicking those buttons is a great way to support the show. And now let's jump into this week's episode. Today on the show, I welcome Andrew Burns. Andrew is the brewing instructor at Dakota County Technical College, where they have a one-year brewing science and production certificate. Before becoming an instructor, he worked as a shift brewer and a head brewer, and he's also been home brewing for nearly 15 years. Andrew, it's great to have you on the show for the first time. How you doing, sir?
Hi, Brad. I'm doing well and happy to be here.
Awesome. Are you? How are things up there? You're now. Tell people where you are, because Dakota College. Somebody might think it's actually in Dakota.
Right. Yeah. It's Dakota County is one of the counties right by Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. So I'm here in Minnesota. I live in Minneapolis and teach right here in the metro area.
Awesome. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Did you start? I guess you started home brewing first, or did you start right into pro brewing?
Yeah, no, that's right. I homebrewed for many years as a hobby before making the transition into professional brewing. I started homebrewing, when I was 21 years old in college, living with some friends, and we decided to do it together as a hobby. And that was when I was pursuing my first career as a professional musician. So I went to school for music and became a touring musician and kind of did that for a little while, all the while homebrewing as a hobby. And right about the 2014, I decided to transition out of touring and playing professionally and try to pursue beer as my full-time job. And that's when I got some education and and successfully made the leap from home brewer to pro brewer.
Cool. And where's your work the first time? You said, I think you started as a shift brewer, right?
Well, I've had again, sort of a roundabout experience. My first job as a professional brewer was actually as a head brewer for a really small brew pub. So it was a startup brewery in southern Minnesota called Chapel Brewing. And I was the head brewer in as much as I was the lone brewer. A lot of these small shops, you have one person running all of the beer making operations, from brewing to cleaning the floors to kegging to serving the beer in the tap room. So I did a little bit of all of that.
So you were janitor and head of operations, huh?
And IT department and HR. Yeah. And then after doing that, I wanted to get some experience at a larger production facility. And so that's when I went, again, in Minneapolis to Prize Brewing. That's Pryes. And it's sort of a mid-sized production brewery with a really big tap room, and that's where we had shifts brewing. And I started as part of the team there as a shift brewer, rotating through different stations and different positions, and then wound up managing that brewery's operations. So by the end of my time with Prize, I was managing and training our team of brewers.
Wow, that's cool. And how big was that? How many people? How many brewers, for example?
When I left, we had 6 full-time brewers, and then me managing them as the 7th.
So that is a pretty big operation then, right? How many
Yeah, I mean,
barrels?
it was right around 10,000 barrels a year, something
Yeah,
like that,
that's a
maybe a
big
little under.
operation.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And let's see, you worked as a shift and head brewer. What made you to decide to dive into brewing education now?
Well, it's a funny story. I think it took me a very long time to realize that this was sort of the perfect position for me. I've always loved teaching.
Hmm.
Back when I was a musician, I would teach private lessons, and so I had a little bit of an education background just from doing that. And even working in beer, I maintained a small roster of students for a few years, and then wound up managing a team of brewers, and once again, managing them, being responsible for the operations of the brewery. But a lot of that was training, onboarding new employees or training our existing employees in new processes, new pieces of equipment. And I kind of found that that was the part I really loved the most, was sharing knowledge, teaching. And even as not officially as a teacher, but the times when I was teaching were sort of the most fulfilling.
That's
And
great.
yeah, so I just got lucky that this position, opened up at the technical college where they have a brewing program, and I just felt I was really well positioned to take my industry experience, sort of what I knew from process and norms and best practices of working at scale, and really pursuing my passion for teaching that I've had all along that took me a really long time to figure out I should pursue.
Well, that's great. So tell us a little bit about Dakota County Tech. We were talking, I think, before the show. You mentioned it was sort of a community college level program, right?
Yes, that. So DCTC is like a 1 and 2 year technical college, near Minneapolis, and the brewing program has been around for several years,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of unique amongst brewing programs. We have a 1 year or 1 school year program that's designed for people who want to learn more about beer, learn more about beer making and brewing, maybe probably work in the industry, if not initially, maybe one day. So that could be just people who want to have a job in a brewery, work as a brewer, or some other production focused job, or maybe run a brewer. Maybe they see themselves as a head brewer someday, or maybe even an owner. There's a fair amount of my students who, are experienced homebrewers, and they kind of want to find out what they don't know about the industry so that they can be prepared to, make a career change. That's a common story we hear in brewing. Is it's often not someone's first career. It's often a career change, just like it was for me. My first career was a musician, and I wound up in brewing as sort of following a passion there. So it's a 1 year program, and starting this upcoming school year, so starting in August. For the fall semester, we'll actually have 2 separate programs that are essentially the same curriculum, but maybe serves 2 different needs. We've got our flagship 1 year program, which is in person here on campus. We actually brew on site. We've got some sort of really nice pilot brewing systems and conical fermenters to sort of emulate the commercial brewing process right here on campus. And so, as part of the curriculum, it's hands-on learning,
Mm-hmm.
and that happens here on campus. Like I said, it's 1 school year, and then we'll be launching an online-only program. So hopefully, extend the reach to people who are interested in brewing education, but maybe can't get here every week for their in-class instruction. They could do the same curriculum, same concepts, but just all online. So there'll be a 100% online option launching this fall.
So when you say it's a certificate program, I assume it's not an associate's degree, right?
Yes, that's right.
1 year
So it's not
certificate.
right. It's a 1 year certificate. It's not an associate's degree. It doesn't require any gen eds or extra college classes or liberal arts or anything like that.
So you're just
You know,
focused on brewing for the year, and I think I read somewhere it was on the weekends too for people that are local.
Yeah, that's right. So for people here in Minnesota, we expect that our typical student probably has a day job. In fact, some of them are working in breweries already, or they sort of quit their day job, go get a job as a packaging tech at a brewery, and sign up, for this program sort of all at once. But the idea is we run it all on Saturdays. The program is aimed at adults. You have to be 21 to even enroll in the program. So nobody's coming straight out of high school and going into this type of program. So we expect you to have probably have a day job. So we're not going to try to interfere with that too much. We run all of the in-person classes on Saturdays.
Mm-hmm. That must be, that's pretty convenient then if you're a full-time job or whatever, regular job, right?
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, that's the goal.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned you were a long-time home brewer. Let's say somebody was also a reasonably good home brewer looking to go pro. What kind of advantage would they get from signing up for a program like yours?
Well, I think there's a ton. I'm a little bit biased, obviously, due to my position, but also this was the path I took. When I wanted to make that leap from home brewer to pro brewer, I went to Siebel Institute in Chicago.
Yeah.
And at the time, the only way to really do that was to actually sort of quit a job and started a new job so that I had a bank of time where I could just leave and go for several weeks and live in Chicago and take these courses 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. It was sort of a very compact, intense time frame. But what it does do is I think it introduces you to a lot of really, really important concepts that you're going to need as a professional brewer that might not be relevant to home brewers. Mm-hmm. One of the things I love about home brewing is that the home brewing community has really adapted the brewing process to suit the needs of someone who's brewing at home, someone who's brewing in small scales compared to brewery-sized vessels. Maybe you're chasing fun and flavor over repeatability and quality and consistency or cost. And so a lot of the things that homebrewers do, which I think are fantastic, I think it's the way that people should be brewing at home, aren't exactly the way we do it at scale in the industry. I had to unlearn or relearn a lot of habits. Mm-hmm. In particular, just the way we control the process, how rigorous we are in terms of testing and measuring and verifying is quite a bit different at the professional scale. There's also just things that aren't feasible at a big scale, so we have to find alternative ways to deal with them. And so what I think the formal education offers is some sort of scientific grounding, so you understand exactly what's happening in the brewing process and can make adjustments to suit your needs. And then an overview of what are best practices, what are industry norms. Not every brewery operates the same way. And so I view one of the goals of education as presenting you with a variety of options and the variety of solutions that brewers have found over the years. And so that you have the tools to pick the one that matches your situation. The way a small brew pub that only sells directly into their tap room develops a recipe is probably quite a bit different than the way a large scale production facility that brews multiple times a day and primarily sells packaged product is going to handle things.
Yeah. Let's say I'm the opposite. Let's say I'm a young person who maybe isn't into home brewing yet, but would like to work at a commercial brewery someday. What kind of experience would I get if I was starting from scratch?
Well, one of the things I like about the beer industry is education isn't required. It's still an industry where you can sort of begin with zero experience, find a brewery, usually in packaging, would be a department that often hires people with sort of no formal experience. And you can just work your way up. You can sort of climb the ladder. You can learn on the job. But the reality of that is that it's going to take a long time. Oftentimes breweries are really busy. They're staffed just well enough to produce the amount of product that they need to be producing, and there's not a ton of time for shadowing and apprenticeship or on the job training. I mean, that's there and that happens, and that's sort of the traditional path that a lot of today's head brewers took to get to where they are. But more and more what we're seeing is that brewing education is a way to sort of accelerate that time path. Instead of spending maybe 5 years working in packaging and working in the cellar and sort of slowly gaining the knowledge and the trust of a head brewer before you're allowed sort of to transition to a brewing role and work in the hot side of the process, an educational program like this could take just 1 year and you're sort of ready to make that leap. Mm-hmm. So if you are a young person who, is 21 and wants to work in breweries, which I encourage. I think it's a good career path, and maybe not a traditional career path that many people are aware of. I think the best way to do it is to just sort of jump in, go apply for those entry-level positions, just get in and get there, get doing and working. And at the same time, if you can find a way to squeeze education in, that's why, our program is scheduled the way it is. You can really accelerate that and move into more of the sort of career type brewing positions a lot faster.
Mm-hmm. Well, what kind of topics do you cover in your technical brewing program?
Well, I kind of view it as sort of four main areas of what we're trying to do. So one of the big ones is the science that's related to brewing. So that is science related to yeast and yeast health and yeast fermentation, sort of the life cycle of a yeast cell. So a lot of biology involved with that. Science like the chemistry in water, the chemistry in the mash, sort of the relationship between water chemistry and mashing and what's happening there with alkalinity and pH, as well as looking at the enzymes that happen in the mash, sort of all of that. And then, sort of the science of what's happening in fermentation, aging, oxidation, carbonation, what does volumes of CO2 mean? How do we measure it? And then there's the sort of the industry norm practical knowledge, which is, okay, so you've learned the science, the foundation. Now, this is what it actually looks like. This is what it feels like. This is what the life of a brewer, what the job of a cellar person actually entails. Then we have the hands-on experience, which in our case on campus, we have our brewing lab where we have our pilot systems. And then the fourth leg is the internship experience or the industry experience. So as part of the certificate, everyone who goes through our program does an internship. So they go work at a brewery that's local to them. And it can be a paid internship or an unpaid internship. It really depends on the needs of the brewery and the needs of the student. And then they sort of to bring all that learning together, actually, put the boots on, get their hands dirty, and see what it's like to work in a production facility.
Well, that's really cool. Tell us a little more about that hands-on program. So I'm kind of interested. Are you working at a craft brewery, I assume, probably? Yeah.
So for the most part, that's the type of breweries, around where we are in Minneapolis, and the types of breweries that are often willing to host and want to host interns are small craft breweries. Students really do have the freedom to pursue an internship with any brewery that they are interested in. If, I encourage students to make those real life relationships and to do, go out there, go talk to the head brewer or an owner and say, hey, I'm in this program. I'd like to do an internship here. What would that look like? Can we make it happen? And so one of the cool things is that students often intern at breweries that they're a fan of. And that's kind of exciting for everyone involved. A lot of craft breweries, just due to the numbers, there's a small number of production facilities that employ a small number of brewers compared to a large number of craft breweries. Even if they're not making as many barrels of beer, they employ a lot more brewers and have a lot more room for interns to come in. And honestly, that is the type of student that I'm seeing, is almost entirely people who are interested in craft beer. They like their small local breweries. They want to see more of them in the world. They want to work in them. They have a passion for quality products. They want to learn what goes into it. And so it's just a natural fit to land at those internships.
Awesome. Well, I want to go back and walk through the other three topics you talked about. The first one was science. So Can you talk a little bit, maybe a little more in depth on what kind of science? Do you have to have a lot of math background? Is there a lot of microbiology you got to understand to be able to do this?
So you don't need a lot of math. You don't need a heavy science background. But if you do have those skills, there are some really exciting careers in beer that would pair really well with like the type of certificate we're offering. So, one of the career paths is if you have a background in science, maybe you have an undergraduate degree in chemistry or biology, and you go, you know what, I want to go work in beer, in breweries, bring my science background into it. A lot of breweries have lab positions, quality positions. where a science background is really important. And in that regard, I view my curriculum that we're offering here at DCTC as sort of you probably know more about biology and about chemistry than a typical brewer would ever need to know. So here's the beer specific knowledge that will be really valuable for you.
Mm-hmm.
But for the typical brewer, it's much more of a conceptual understanding of what's happening, along with a practical approach. So here is the life cycle of a yeast cell. Here is how they're going to take in sugar. They're going to produce these byproducts. Here's where acetaldehyde comes from. Here's where diacetyl comes from. Here is how these, flavorful molecules interact. Here's why these things are important. And now what does that look like in practice? Well, if you're in a brewery, these are probably the processes you're going to be following. And so if you have that sort of theoretical underpinning, then we can then move from there into the practical approach and say, now that you know all that, this is why we do things this way as opposed to some other way. And the same thing with a numbers perspective. You can absolutely calculate out any aspect of a beer recipe by hand. And it's a good exercise to sort of understand how every input could affect the output of your beer. But at the end of the day, I tell my students, software is probably going to be where you're going to live. You're very unlikely to be calculating recipes by hand anymore. I don't know any brewers who do that.
I know a few old school ones, but there aren't many.
Right. I mean, once you get to know your system well enough, you could probably write a recipe by hand and say, I don't know what the gravity exactly is going to be. I don't know what the color is going to be, but I know this is going to be about right. And I don't know the specific numbers, but we could brew it and it'll taste really good. But when it comes to actually doing calculations with water chemistry or making adjustments to IBU based on hop additions or just formulating a recipe in the first place, we work in software, and I train the students. I give them a little tutorial on how to use BeerSmith. I encourage them to use BeerSmith to sort of calculate up their recipes, and we use those calculators because, again, that's the practical approach where practicality meets the science. It's important to know why different water ions are important. It's important to know what impacts they're going to have on the flavor of the beer and the chemistry involved with the mash. But it's probably not important to know exactly how many parts per million you get per gram of this versus per gram of that. We can let computers handle that.
You don't have to calculate the molar mass and all that other stuff.
Right. Right. It's just not, that's the practicality aspect. That's that part of the curriculum that says, okay, this is the theory, but what is it actually? How do we actually put it into practice? You're in a brewery, you're by yourself. You need to figure it out. What are you going to do? What tools are you going to reach for?
Well, I wanted to dive into that section next. So let's talk about the practical. I assume this is where we get into the real differences between home brewing and pro brewing, for example, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. So it's a lot of, we talk a lot about standard operating procedures, SOPs, sort of why we do things in the order we do them in. We do address the differences between home brewing and pro brewing. Here on campus, we have these 10-gallon pilot systems, and so
about the homebrew size, right?
About the homebrew size, it's like a really, really nice homebrew setup or a very, very small commercial setup, depending on how you look at it, right? There's a little bit of temperature control. It's continuous sparging. You can, we use an actual plate heat exchanger to knock out the wort into conical fermenters. We have glycol to chill the conical fermenters. And so all of that feels very much like commercial brewing. It's just at the very small scale.
Yeah, obviously.
But when we talk about our processes, how do we clean up? What chemicals are we using? What's the process for cleaning? We look at that from the commercial brewing perspective. So we're using things like caustic as opposed to maybe PBW, which is a non-caustic cleaner.
Sure.
We're using pumps and spray balls and best practices when it comes to cleaning our cold side equipment. It's still small, which is great. It's low risk. It's much more manageable, and students get more hands-on time in the lab. Instead of having, say, you could imagine a world where we ran a 1-barrel or a 3-barrel brewery or something like that, and we just had the one brew house. But instead, we have 6 pilot systems, which means that students get a lot more time on an individual basis on the systems, and they get to practice brewing the recipes they want to develop, they want to brew, and getting that hands-on time, which then sets them up to go into an internship and say, oh, I've recognized doing this. Of course, I did it on a small scale. Now this is what it looks like at the big scale, but I recognize this.
And do you dive into like some of the new pro brewing craft techniques? There's a lot of people making hazy IPAs and other things using specific techniques, for example.
Yeah, we do talk about that, and I do try to stay current on those not fads, but sort of new adaptations. We talk about it, we address it. I mean, you brought up hazy IPAs. I think that's a fantastic example. A lot of books that we read from, or for reading even slightly older sources, hazy IPAs wasn't even a category of a beer style, much less were there best practices or sort of this general knowledge on how to brew this type of beer. So that's a great example of having to keep current. I have the advantage of only recently leaving industry, so I haven't been out of the game for very long, and I still try to keep current with that. So, we talk about Kveik yeast. We talk about seltzer brewing, which is gigantic in the industry right now. We talk about hazy IPAs. The different approaches, how we would approach that style of brewing, and even into equipment. Why would you choose this style of brew house over another style of brew house? Well, maybe this style of brew house is really good for doing more traditional styles with step mashes, more of a German tradition, whereas this style is sort of set up to brew hazy IPAs. And if that's what you're going to be brewing, then that's sort of the equipment you want in your dream brewery, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you've been a home brewer, you've been a shift brewer, and you've been a head brewer. What are the different jobs like?
Well, as a shift brewer is a lot of what you're doing as a shift brewer is really refining your workflow and refining your process. You aren't generally choosing what gets brewed. You might have one or two beers a year where you get to write the recipe and have some input, but for the most part, you're brewing what you are being told to brew, and your main thing is you're following an SOP. So you intimately know your system and your processes. And in any sort of larger scale production facility, the shift brewers are probably the ones who know all of the quirks of the brew house, know exactly, what warning signs to look for if they're getting a stuck runoff, or know exactly how to set a certain valve to get it to work exactly perfectly. And so if that, it was really a refinement of the process. And once you get good at it, it's almost zen. You can sort of brew, exactly what's going to happen next. And so you can sort of plan out your day, set yourself up for success, and sort of everything goes exactly like clockwork. That doesn't always happen.
And I mean, one of the big differences between home brewing and pro brewing is consistency, right? I mean, you're brewing the same beer in many cases over and over again, and you want every batch to be exactly the same, right?
I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, not even over and over again, maybe even multiple times in the same day, right? It's pretty common for those sorts of facilities to brew 2 or 4 or sometimes even 6 batches a day.
Wow.
And so oftentimes you're brewing, you are juggling multiple batches. That's sort of the other aspect of shift brewing, is that you get so good at producing a beer, at taking the raw ingredients and turning them into wort, that you can start to do more than one. So, if you are a shift brewer, chances are it's a production facility that runs multiple times a day, which means you've probably got one batch of beer that's further along than the other, and they're all going to go into the same tank, but you are managing, okay, so this one is in the whirlpool step right now, whereas this one I am lautering and sparging, and I'm milling my third one for the day. And you're sort of doing a lot of that multitasking and juggling, which requires a really intimate knowledge of the process, so that frees up your mind to focus on that multitasking aspect of it. As a head brewer, in a small facility, you're often the sole brewer. So, if you want to write a recipe and then go execute that recipe where it feels very much like home brewing, you just get to do it every day.
Yeah.
That's kind of what a head brewer at a brew pub is like, with the addition of you're also responsible for all the clean. And you'll probably spend 3 times as much time cleaning all of your equipment and cleaning your processes than you are actually brewing, or much less writing recipes and ordering ingredients and that sort of stuff. At a larger facility, one thing that head brewers often realize is that at a certain point, they have to become a little bit more hands-off. You have this devotion to quality. It's your product. Oftentimes your name is on the product, and people know that, this is coming from you, but you're not the one who's actually on the brew deck brewing it. You're not the one in the cellar who's making sure that the tank is sanitized before it receives the wort. You're not responsible for quality over the process. So a lot of what being a head brewer is at that scale is being a manager and a teacher and a mentor, and you have to be involved enough with the production process that quality is being maintained, but far enough removed that people can do their jobs, that you're not interfering with the shift brewers, who, like I said, often have every quirk of the brew house memorized far more than the head brewer does, because the head brewer is more responsible for the big picture, for quality from beginning to end, ordering ingredients, setting up the schedule for what gets brewed when, coming up with new seasonals, writing new recipes, promoting the brewery, all that other stuff that isn't actually brewing.
That's what I was wondering. Do you cover a lot of the business aspects of actually running a small brewery?
We cover enough of the business aspects that we get an idea of what it's like, but I am not a business person. I'm a process person. That's the aspect of the industry that I'm an expert in, and that's really what the program focuses on. So it's not uncommon for someone who already has a business background to say, I want to own a brewery, and they come to me and they enroll in the program so that they can, excuse me, I'm going to cough here.
That's okay.
I'll start that sentence again. We talk about business, and we talk about the business of the industry and what it's like at a surface level, and enough for you to have an okay understanding of what's happening. But I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert in beer laws. I'm not a business person. I'm not an expert in running a business. I'm an expert in the process. And
I know there are some programs and courses that are centered around opening your own brewery, but obviously that becomes, a lot of it's not about brewing, really.
Well, that's exactly right. And so, I've had students who have a business background and they decide that they want to open a brewery, so they come and enroll in the program so that they can learn the beer-specific aspects of the industry to pair with their industry knowledge. Or with their business knowledge. I've also got some students who don't have much business knowledge. Again, they see themselves as brewery owners or head brewers, and so they take some entrepreneurship and business classes at the same time. Mm-hmm. Being a community college and a technical college like we are, we have those options. And again, it's pretty darn affordable considering what the cost of college education is.
Yeah.
And so that's another career path. Oftentimes for successful breweries, the business person and the head brewer beer person are not the same person in that business. That is, it's important for a head brewer to understand the business of beer and the business of selling beer. But at large successful breweries, or even mid-sized breweries, that's often two different people who wear two different hats and have two different specialties.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do you compare this program? You went through the Seibel Institute. How do you compare, what do they do at that program versus something, versus your program, for example? Well,
a lot of the curriculum is essentially the same. We break it up into similar chunks. We talk about an overview, and then we go into sort of hot side wort production. We follow that up with second semester is more cold side and what we call beer production, mm-hmm. which leads into packaging and quality control. And so we cover the same sort of material in the same general order, same type of curriculum. Like I said, I went through part of that Seibel program. The big difference there is that their program is very condensed from a time perspective. So it's really well suited for someone who's going to take time off work, go do it all at once, get it out of the way. So that, their flagship program in Chicago is 6 weeks in Chicago,
sure.
followed by another 6 weeks in Germany. That's their on-the-job component, is with some breweries in Germany, mm-hmm. And that's where they get the on-the-job experience. What we're trying to offer is, as a counterpoint to that, is one school year as opposed to short number of weeks. So the idea is we think it'll fit in the working person's schedule.
Sure.
And so the internship component doesn't happen in Germany unless you want it to happen in Germany, right? But you get to work with a local brewery that maybe interests you if you can, establish that relationship. Cool. I have my own industry connections, so I do, try to set students up with breweries that I know want to take interns. But most students find their own internship.
That's great.
So really, the main difference is just the mode of delivery. The
compressed program. Yeah.
Yeah, compressed program versus more of a traditional schedule. But even so, one school year, it comes out to 32 Saturdays.
Yeah.
Or 32 weeks of online instruction for the new online, which, by the way, is fully asynchronous. So it's really, you complete
kind of go at your own pace, I guess.
Yeah, each week's worth of work and readings and assignments at the pace that makes sense for you and your schedule. And as long as you finish by the end of the week, then you're caught up and we go on to the next week.
Cool.
And so, yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about higher level brewing degrees, like getting a bachelor's degree, maybe from a big name like the University of California at Davis. What would a bachelor's degree or maybe even a master's degree add in terms of brewing education?
It really depends on what your aspirations are in the brewing industry and where you want to end up and what part of the process really interests you. If you are really into quality and the lab aspect of brewing, if you would want to be this type of person who is running the microscope and taking samples and making sure that this batch is just as good as the last batch, there can be some real value in having that sort of more formal bachelor's level education. And there is a place for that in the brewing industry. Like I said earlier, many breweries have a lab or a quality department of some size, even if it's just one person. But oftentimes that person has a bachelor's degree in a science field, biology or chemistry, or like Zimmergy specific, yeast specific bachelors are really, really helpful and really valuable.
Yeah, there's a lot of programs now that offer bachelor's degrees in brewing and brewing science, for example. Yeah.
Around here, again, I mostly know the job market in Minnesota, where I've spent all my time. I don't see head brewers, being more likely to hire someone to just work in production as a shift brewer or as an assistant brewer or as a brewing manager or anything like that. I don't see them hiring with someone with a bachelor's degree over somebody with some kind of experience.
That makes sense.
And so, which is one of the reasons why we view this program as a certificate, as being, listen, it's about getting you the knowledge and getting you the practice and getting you your foot in the door so that you can sort of accelerate your trip up to that level of a job based on real world actual brewing experience, which at the end of the day, that is really the most valuable thing for a brewer to have in any capacity, is that real experience. And that is probably, at least for now, the way the industry is, probably still going to always be more valuable than a 4-year degree in that aspect. Like I said, quality, lab work. Many large breweries employ people with PhDs to manage their yeast program. Mm-hmm. And so that's a very viable path for someone from academia who wants to go to work in industry to be involved in beer.
Yeah, Chris White's PhD, obviously, right?
Right, exactly.
White Labs, yeah.
And so if you're super into microbiology and you want to get into yeast and yeast health and fermentation and quality and all of that, there could definitely be some real value to that bachelor's degree. Or a more traditional sort of bachelor's degree in a more general biology or chemistry focus is often just as good, because the beer people figure, well, we can teach you about beer. We can teach you about yeast. You can learn about brewing. If you've got the lab background, that's really valuable in that department.
Sure. Well, let's talk about payback. So a lot of people go into debt to go to college these days.
Yeah.
What kind of return can you expect if you get, say, a technical degree or maybe an associate's degree from a program like yours in terms of salary?
Well, so first, I'd want to talk about the cost of the program. One of the big advantages of where we are in a 2-year technical college is that the tuition is really darn affordable. So we're just over $200 per credit at DCTC, which when you do break it down per credit, that means the flagship in-person program is right around $5,000 for the full school year.
Yeah, not bad.
And then the online only program has fewer credits because we don't have that in-person lab component. We rely on the internship for that. So the online program is actually fewer credits. It's actually under $4,000. So right off the bat,
so you're not going $200,000 into debt for college.
No, right. This type of certificate is really affordable. On top of that, residents of Minnesota, we're a Minnesota-based college. We're part of the Minnesota state system. Residents of Minnesota who don't already have a bachelor's degree could probably get their schooling paid for entirely. Wow. It's a new program that Minnesota is launching. And so that means if you live in Minnesota right now, you could probably get free college if you don't already have a bachelor's degree. It depends on how much money you make, but if you're working in the beer industry, I can tell you you're not going to be above that threshold.
Well, that's the other side. How much do you actually make, say, right, as a shift brewer or production brewer?
Right. And this has been trending upward in recent years, at least where I am. So to put some real numbers on it, in Minnesota, or at least in the metro area around Minneapolis, St. Paul, which is where I'm most familiar,
sure,
it's a pretty representative city. It's not the most expensive place to live in the country, but it's still a major city. It's got a higher cost of living than some of the more rural parts of the country, kind of middle of the road, kind of average in terms of number of breweries and opportunities and cost of living and all that. So around where I'm at, I don't really see full-time production staff anywhere making less than $20 an hour.
Not bad.
And anyone who's got brewer in their title is probably making $22 or more an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And you can look at salary ranges for head brewers or sort of more higher up positions in larger breweries being anywhere from $60,000 to $100,000 a year.
Sure.
Again, this is just me. I don't have any data to back this up. This is just sort of me taking the pulse of the industry around me. I mean, it is not the most high paid job in the world. I mean, we all know that. But it is, at least around here, still a living wage, and there is room for growth. And if you begin in the industry, you can sort of right at the entry level be supporting yourself pretty decently, and that there is room to grow into the sort of full-time salary positions. That, I mean, that's what I was, living on for sure, 10 years before coming into education. I mean, I actually took a pay cut to come into college education. So that's sort of where we're at in terms of industry. And compared to, like I said, I don't know the cost of all the other programs. I know what I paid, or what the cost was of me to go to Siebel. It was quite a bit higher.
Yeah.
And compared to like a 2-year or a 4-year education, I mean, the all-in bill for this certificate is pretty darn affordable, and it does allow you to go directly from this certificate into the workforce in a brewery. I mean,
even a bachelor's degree at a regular, like regular 4-year college, a state school is what, over $20,000 now, I think, right?
Per
year. I'm talking about
per year, right? Yeah, exactly.
So, would there be much? Would you see a much higher salary, perhaps, with a bachelor or master's degree? I guess not as a production brewer, probably, but
probably not as a production brewer. No, if you want to go straight to a manager role or work into a quality department, there is probably more than $20 to $23 an hour in those departments, right? Sort of right with a bachelor's. But in production, I mean, not really. I mean, we're an industry that is partially based on passion. People have a passion for beer. They like making the product. And so there is usually someone who is willing to do that job for around that $20 to $20 some an hour mark. Yeah. So a bachelor's degree doesn't necessarily set yourself ahead in production. it might set yourself ahead if you get that real production experience and then want to move into a management role, like what I was doing.
Or maybe an entrepreneurial thing where you're actually interested in opening your own business, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, that has its own costs. Well, are there any aspects of the program that we didn't cover already?
Gosh, I don't think so. No, I think we've really covered it.
Good.
Other than maybe the URL where people can go to learn more.
Yeah, sure. Please, share where can people learn more? I should have asked that.
So it is Dakota County Technical College. So those letters are dctc.edu/brew. That's BREW. I'll say it again, dctc.edu/brew. And that'll have all the information about the current program and a little note there that we are launching the new online program upcoming this year.
Great. I'll make sure if you send me that link, I'd be happy to put it on the show notes for people can find it. BeerSmith.com/blog is where the shows are listed and the show notes are for all the episodes. Well, awesome, Andrew. I just want to get your closing thoughts now.
I have been so focused on the education aspect of brewing and, recognizing that there's a need for skilled, qualified brewers in the industry, that I am just, you might hear, you often hear a lot of mixed messages about making the transition from home brewing into pro brewing, or people in the industry saying, why would you ever want to become a brewer? And I can tell you that I made that decision and I enjoyed it. I thought it was a wonderful decision. I wouldn't have left the brewing industry for a different job unless it was something like what I'm doing. And so I guess my closing thoughts are that it's still a good industry to work in if you're passionate about beer. There are good jobs out there, and that education is a part of the equation that hasn't traditionally been part of brewing. It's often been an on-the-job apprenticeship type industry, but
sure.
I see that changing, and I think that that if you're the type of person who is contemplating that sort of a career change or contemplating getting into this industry, that a low risk way to do it is to start with education and find out, is this, before you quit your day job, is this really for me? One of the best ways to do it is with not just this program here at DCTC, but any of the multiple sort of non-degree, certificate-based, just learn what you need to learn type programs are really a wonderful way to explore if this industry is right for you, because I think it is right for a lot of people.
Awesome, Andrew. Well, really appreciate you coming on the show today. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My guest today was Andrew Burns. He's instructor at Dakota County Technical College, and he's also a brewer. Andrew, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
A big thank you to Andrew Burns for joining me this week. Thanks also to our sponsors, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They invite you to join their upcoming brewery workshop, March 24th to 27th in Austin, Texas. This one-of-a-kind event brings together professional brewers to help you start or grow your own craft brewery. To learn more, please visit breweryworkshop.com. Again, that's breweryworkshop.com. And also the Barrel Mill, creators of the Infusion Spiral, used to add flavor and aroma to wine, spirits, and beer. Their unique spiral cut design creates unrivaled surface area in a small package, allowing fast extraction of the toasted oak's aroma and flavor compounds. Looking for woods other than oak? Try their exotic woods, offering spirals made from amburana, American and French oak, aspen, Spanish cedar, cypress, and sugar maple. For more information, go to infusionspiral.com. Again, that's infusionspiral.com. And BeerSmith Web, the online version of BeerSmith brewing software. BeerSmith for the web lets you design great beer recipes from any browser, including your tablet or phone. Edit recipes on the go with access to the same full suite of recipe building tools as our desktop version. Try BeerSmith for the web today by creating a free account at beersmithrecipes.com. And finally, the reminder to click that like and subscribe button on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or whatever platform you're on. Clicking those buttons is a great way to support the show. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great Brewing Week.